Through storytelling, our exhibitions and programs amplify lived experiences, ensuring that our voices are not silenced, especially when history is repeating itself. The disgraceful and unconstitutional deportation of American citizens of Mexican descent in the 1930s happened here, right here. And it's happening again in our communities. So I believe, and as CEO of this institution, that it is our responsibility to ensure that no one forgets that history. And that we do everything we can to resist. Before I officially turn it over for the rest of the conversation, I'd like to acknowledge a few guests. We've got a few guests in here. You're all special guests, so these are additional guests. Leo de Valenzuela, representing the office of California Senator Lina Gonzalez. Thank you. And I don't know if Solomon Rivera made it in. Not yet, so he would be joining us here this evening. So thank you all for coming. I'm so pleased to have you all here. We were just having a conversation earlier, and I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that we are occupying the lands of Tongva Garmileno. And this is for us an ongoing conversation here at La Plaza. We recognize our role in the need for truth and reconciliation, and I think it's very, very important for us to always acknowledge that. So I thank you for being my eyes tonight. And so thank you all for being here. And before, without further ado, I want to introduce Katy Long, who is the founder and director of the California Migration Museum. Thank you all.
Well, first of all, a huge thank you to La Plaza for inviting us and for helping us so much with all the logistics here. This is our first event in LA. We are mostly based right now in the Bay Area, although we have big ambitions. This is hopefully the beginning of telling a lot more migration histories and migration stories in LA as well. But thank you to all of you for coming here on what is a very lovely evening and spending it with us here in this room. It's funny, we originally scheduled this event to actually take place 4 days before the presidential inauguration. And then we had to postpone it because of the wildfires. But in some ways, I feel like we're in like a different era altogether. And that it's not just a month has passed, but something more profound has happened, and many of the things that we might have been speculating about a month ago have, really become something very real, and given us even more clarity about why history is so important. And certainly I would say the last month has been far more intense in terms of reading the news than I even imagined it would be. And while I don't think any of us fully know what the next few years are going to look like, what I do think is very clear is that this conversation we're going to have about mass deportation, about the meaning of citizenship, birthright citizenship, is very much going to be a conversation that we all need to be having and be aware of. So, this is where we are. But I think one of the things that we can hopefully do tonight is think a little bit about how do we place where we are now, this brave new world we find ourselves in the context of where does it fit in the wider sense of the history of the US, the history of California. And given we are a history museum, no surprise that I think history can help us, and that it's true that none of us are as original as we like to think we are. And given that so much of what is going on with Trump right now is fundamentally concerned with trying to tell a particular kind of history. It's Make America Great Again. That carries so many ideas about what history is with what the past is. I think that's why it's so crucial, and it's so nice to see so many people here challenging that by coming to hear a different kind of history, which is more complex, which has more challenges to those narratives, and which is well-researched and factually grounded, and that doesn't always tie up into one nice, neat little bow, but it's real in a way that some of the other stories we're hearing a lot right now are not. So that is a little bit about why I think this is important, and a little bit about why this panel is I hope going to help us explore a project that we actually started, before 2025, before 2024, before any of that happened, which is Ni de Aquí, Ni de Allá. And it's a story about Mexican American repatriation in the 1930s, and in particular how those returns, as Leticia said, played out right here in this neighborhood. I think it's pretty obvious why that is relevant right now. But I think before even any of that hit the news, what made us really want to tell this story was the extent to which it had been forgotten, the extent to which it is invisible, even when you visit this neighborhood. You can find it if you look hard, but it's certainly not something which is easy to come across. And so, that really was where we started when we were looking at what stories we should start to tell. This idea that even in California, which has moved a lot further than many other places in the US in recognizing the trauma of the Mexican American repatriations of 1930s, it's still a story that most people say, I have no idea. I didn't know that happened. And that is, a dangerous place to find yourselves in, I think. But I think we also, as we began our research, we knew we wanted to tell the story here because of the other stories that exist on Olvera Street. And in particular, there's this amazing, fascinating contrast between this story of Mexican American repatriation and the story of Christine Sterling and the kind of remaking of Olvera Street in her idea of what Mexico should look like. This kind of very romanticized idea of a city of yesteryear. And I think the reason why that kind of captured our imagination was this idea that that was happening at the same time in the same place, in neighboring streets. And it opened up so many interesting questions about how sometimes people can treat culture very separately from the people who create it and the consequences of doing that. So those were kind of our reasons for starting. I think it's kind of, in a way, tragic that as we've done this project over the last 2 years, it's become more and more relevant and more clear why this history really does need to be at the center of all our minds. But I hope that that is actually going to be most of what you hear from me this evening, because our plan is actually to hear from these guys. And we're also going to play on the video some of the scenes from the tour, from the experience. You guys, some of you may have taken the tour. I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't, to go out there and experience the full, it's about an hour long. As an organization, started in LA, but it become a national force in the campaign for immigration and human rights. And you've been at the helm of this for a quarter century. Which is an incredible achievement. And I was excited to learn that she's also a history major. So, I think that question around how history connects to, your work today at the forefront of advocacy for immigrants is going to be really interesting. And then next we have Karla Estrada, who we have been, I feel Karla is the heart of Aquí, Allá, really. She is the narrator. She's kind of horrified that you will hear her voice later tonight as we play the clips, but she tells some of her own personal story in this, and I think does a wonderful job of connecting that past, which is 100 years ago, to the present. And I don't want to share that, because I think we will hear it in her own words later this evening, but she's also a UCLA graduate, she's a writer, political activist, and a former DACA recipient. So yeah, it was such a great moment when we found you and you agreed to be part of the project. So thank you so much. And then, last but not least, Francisca Balderrama, who I think it's fair to say wrote the book on Mexican American repatriations in the 1930s. It was certainly where I first found out about this story. If you haven't read Decade of Betrayal, definitely do. It's, you know, an amazing gathering of a lot of really kind of first-person accounts as well as the scholarly research behind those to understand what went on. And I just, again, want to say thank you. You were a fantastic advisor, along with your wife, Christine, who, you know, did many of the groundbreaking recordings that really started to surface these stories in the 1970s. So, yeah, really excited to have you here too. Thanking all of you for joining. If you could start by helping to set the kind of wider scene for us by explaining the significance of what La Plaza was in the neighborhood at that time and the broader context in which that 1931 raid took place.
This was the historic center of Los Angeles as it was colonized and Mexicanized, you know, from its founding. And so this particular location being a target area for this roundup which occurred, which also, as you introduced it, was the first time that the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is the ICE of that historical period, cornered off a public area like that. And I think it really speaks to American attitude towards the Mexican community, in the sense that the Mexican is the other at that historical period and today's historical period as well. In the sense that the roundup using LAPD, which was against the rules and regulations of that time and this time, in which it's only the obligation of the Immigration Service and the Border Patrol to take people into custody. The roundup occurred in this area, and they put into custody 33 Mexicans, 2 Asians, 1 black person. They also put into custody 2 vice consuls of the Mexican consulate. The consuls were able to get out and get themselves free by showing their credentials. And that created a climate of fear in Mexican Los Angeles and throughout the United States about the Mexican community. This is done by the Hoover administration, whose Secretary of Labor, William Doak, has ambitions about being president. Interesting, the Secretary of Labor has control over the Immigration Service. What does that say about Mexicans in this community? I could go on, but I know other people want to speak.
No,
I don't want to give a lecture, so please tell me when to stop.
I think, you know, one of the questions I had here was this question of the psychological aspects, because in the end, I think it's only 12 people who are eventually actually deported,
Right,
but
right.
The psychological impact was obviously much bigger and had reverberations.
Right, and it's very true that, see, what happens, it creates such a climate of fear that in actuality, in this historical period, which is different than today, is that only 10% of people were rounded up by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. The vast majority were sent by companies, U.S. Steel, Ford Motor Company, Southern Pacific Railroad, that took it upon themselves to ship people out. And the different states and the different counties. But there are people that were so fearful, they just loaded up their cars and they headed to the border.
Yeah. So, Karla, can I ask a little bit about how you connected or your own reaction to this 1931 raid? Because although we didn't hear it, you know, in the wider tour, you talk about this idea of, you say, I can imagine how they must have felt. No, I know how they felt. And then you go on to talk a little bit about your memories of growing up in the Obama era deportations. Can you talk a little bit about how you see those connections between then and your own experience?
Yeah, thank you, absolutely. So, I mean, the reason why I am sitting right in front of you is because I have a history of family deportation. Everybody thinks that during a democratic rule, we are quote unquote safe, right? Well, we're not. We are not safe. We are always in danger. Like that dog, sitting peacefully around fire. That's us all the time. Mm-hmm. So in 2017, my entire family was here. I had my mother, my father, and my brother. But during the Obama era silent raids, not only people with quote-unquote criminal record got detained and deported, but it was also just innocent bystanders. And also they targeted people with misdemeanors, non-violent, that were also rounded up and deported at that time. And one of them was my younger brother. And he got deported, he went through the system. He ended up in Adelanto Detention Center, which at the time it had a huge controversy, as it is actually now, of mistreatment of immigrants. At that time, there were hunger strikes happening, and my brother was actually in Adelanto during those hunger strikes. It was a very traumatic experience for myself and my family, right? Eventually, my younger brother did get deported. In April of 2017, and when my brother got deported, he was very young, and my brother arrived here in the United States when he was 5 months old. So you can imagine the trauma and the shock that he went through when he got deported to a country that is his, but he's actually a foreigner, right, in his own country. He didn't know anything. He could barely speak the language itself properly, at least for Mexicans in Mexico. So, it was a very traumatic experience. My brother, unfortunately, did try to cross by himself, thinking that he could do it. And he got into an accident. They stole his possessions, his documentation, and because of that, my parents decided to self-deport. So they can take care of my younger brother and help him through the transition, which I went from having my entire family to no family at all, right? And at that time, I was still a DACA recipient, so the implications of that were absolutely monumental, to the point that for a bit of time, I considered self-deporting myself as well, just because I went from family to no family in 2 months. So, and the reason why I tell this story is because my story, ultimately, it's not different than a lot of people here in Los Angeles and around the country, even around the world, but from the past. Right, my fear and my anguish of losing my family, like de la noche a la mañana, as we say, happened in 1931. Or the fear of never seeing your family happened to a family in 1931. Those feelings of being paralyzed, of being confused, of not understanding, of just not comprehending the level of injustice that goes through your whole core, of that trauma of not knowing when you're going to see your family, if you're ever going to see your family again, right? And also the desire to remain in this nation, at the same time knowing very well that you are absolutely hated at the same time. Like you want to stay and fight to be here, but at the same time you hate it. You just abhor it at the same time. It's that dichotomy of feelings that I am sure that in 1931, the ones who were detained and the ones who were eventually deported or departed by themselves felt that rage of I am leaving my home, I love my home, but I hate you. I hate you so much. So I can completely relate to some of those feelings that unfortunately they're echoes of the past, but very, very present and in the future as well.
Thank you, and I think you definitely on the tour do a wonderful job of connecting that emotional core of what is both the story of the 1930s and through that whole century to today. Angélica, if I can ask you, this was the first public immigration raid in LA history, in US history. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how helpful you think it is in terms of the work you're doing today to remember this, to kind of think about these long threads of history, when so much of the work we're doing is necessarily, very much driven by the now and the immediate as well.
So first of all, I just really want to say thank you for sharing your story. It really matters a lot that you do. So I came to this work in 1995, right after Proposition 187 had passed, and really staying at CHIRLA. I came as a volunteer, and seeing at CHIRLA, answering the phones, the hotline, which to this day we still have, but answering that hotline and just hearing people in sheer fear of what was going to happen to themselves and their families. But I think for me, deportation, whether it's 1931 or 1954 or now, or in the 70s or 80s or now, it's the same thing. It's the tearing of a people from their home, from their families, and deporting them by force, and absolutely not recognizing their contributions, their rightful place in their country. So I'll just share a little bit about myself. I came to the United States as a child from Durango, Mexico, and I came here undocumented with my sister, my uncle, and my aunt. My uncle was 16, my aunt was 14, and we were literally toddlers going, to getting closer to 5, my sister and I. We came to be reunited with my father and my mother, who had come earlier, who were workers, undocumented workers here. And so we came. I will always thank my mother for making creating that opportunity for us to be reunited. My mom worked in a garment factory, and as well as my uncles and aunts, a lot of the same factory. And so when I was in elementary school, we were all undocumented, so we always knew that, la migra, ¿verdad, could come and take us away. So this was constantly part of the conversation in our home. One, because both during the 70s and 80s, anybody who lived here, there was raids everywhere. There were worksite raids, the INS would get on buses, and so this was not like, it wasn't theoretical, it was real. And so one day, we got home, and my mom didn't come home. And there was a big worksite raid at her factory where she was sewing, and they took her, they took my uncle, my aunt, and deported them back to Mexico. And I remember, I'm the oldest, and I remember my dad in sheer panic because his sister, his brother-in-law, my mom, and so many of our friends had been picked up at this raid. And he just didn't understand, like, what do I do? And I just remember, and he's like, okay, what you got to do is just take care of your brothers and sisters until I figure this out. And so I remember, so like that thing that was supposed to be so, that reassured fear came to our home. And so finally, my mom was able to come back, and I would say, I remember my mom coming back and getting out of the trunk of a car. And how incredibly painful that was to see that, because it's dehuman, it's just, it was just, and that just stayed in my mind in terms of, I was a child seeing it, but it stayed in my mind, and I never quite understood why. Because you don't understand immigration law, going back to the prison, you don't understand how all of these things work, but you deeply understand that you're devalued as a human being. Fast forward, 1986, there's an amnesty. A lot of the folks who were picked up in that raid, suddenly we go from being undocumented to suddenly having our papers. And it's a different life, it's a different reality. And so what I do, when I started at CHIRLA, again as a volunteer, I've been at the organization now for 30 years. And so what I realize and what I fight for is, yes, to defend against all that is horrible that happens in our community and to our people. But what I fight is for that feeling of just being able to live free and be accepted and not being rounded up and not fearing that and not having any children, our children think that their parents are going to be taken away. And most importantly, not be recognized for our contributions. So when we talk about how does that pass, it's that the history of this country is a horrible history of mistreatment, not just of people who are Latinos, but of African Americans, of Asian Americans, of people, LGBTQ+, of our indigenous brothers and sisters. And that history we need to know. But the history and the things that I fight for are the people who stood up and who stand up each and every time that injustice happens in this country. And so what I've seen over all of these years is that people don't sit back and just take it. People stand up and really fight, and our history, and what keeps me going, is the history of our people who say, no, these deportations are wrong. This mistreatment of our people, this erasure of everything we do. And also to stand up to say, we're not just brazos, we're not just people who work. You know, we have families, we have roots, and roots deeper than many people. We are people who come from an indigenous, this is our land, this is where we live. And so to me it's important that when we talk about this, that it's not just a victim history, the history of victimhood, but it really also incorporates the history of resistance and the history of heroes who have stood up each and every time to fight for our rightful place in this country.
Thank you. Francisco, can I just ask you maybe to pick up on a theme there, which is we've had two very, very powerful narratives about how important this history is and how deeply held it is. Could you maybe explain a little bit about why there's also this forgetting or erasure of this history, and why particularly the history of the Mexican American repatriations for many, many decades was, and I would say still is not widely known. You know, what do you think are the structural obstacles, perhaps what are the emotional? Why is it so hard for this history to be heard?
I think in a way that is true, but sitting here in this museum, what's coming to my mind right now is the exhibit that's downstairs. I'm thinking of the oral history testimony that's there, and the oral history testimony by the survivors who were there and experienced it, which echoes what has been just said in this panel very eloquently by my fellow panelists here. And those individuals, and if I may say their names, Emilia Castañeda, Ignacio Piña, Ruben Jimenez, Teresa Martinez, all of those individuals shared their stories. And to echo what was said right here, in all those oral histories, they were involved with a legal suit, they were involved with being interviewed nationally and internationally, radio, television, newspaper, print, all of that occurred. And throughout they were asked, would you want some compensation? They all said no. All they wanted was what happened to them in the 30s would not happen to anybody else. And we've seen here that it does happen to other people. So what happened 100 years ago, they made that story known. Outside the museum is a monument. The only state in the nation that has a formal apology to those that were deported. The term that was used at the time was repatriation. That's a whitewash term, a cover-up term, saying repatriation is supposed to be voluntary. Many were picked up on the streets. Many people were forced to self-deport. Many people accept from charity groups to go. Many people, as I said earlier, from U.S. Steel. These people made an effort at the turn of our century here. They made an effort to get that message out. And they succeeded with an apology from the state. They succeeded by putting it in the curriculum. Not mandated, but encouraged. Textbooks have it. Chicano history's had it since the 70s. U.S. history now talks about it. Maybe I'm too involved with this. And I'll share this, okay? I'm here today. This was the neighborhood of my grandparents and my parents. Right here. They lived here in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. It was their neighborhood here that was being raided. And so this wasn't just professional, this is personal. My spouse out there, Dr. Christine Valenciana, I met her doing research. So the professional is very personal. I think if we put it in the larger context of today, the banning of books, put it in the larger context of the Trump administration, the erasure of history. They don't want to recognize this history. California has done a fair job, not the best job. There are too many people in elementary school and high schools that don't know about it, and too many adults that don't know about it. But when myself and Dr. Valenciana were working on this topic and trying to get legislation through the state of California to become part of the curriculum, there was a local school here, Bell Garden School. The students, one teacher, had the classroom organized around Decade of Betrayal. 6th graders reading Decade of Betrayal. The biggest compliment my work has ever gotten. And,
Where?
yeah,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'll cut this off.
Where?
Those children pushed that bill. They went and gave testimony in Sacramento. And I tell you, I've gone up there a number of times, but they did it. So, I think I answered your question.
I think we're going to come back, but
Okay.
we're going to move on right now. But in a way, it's the same stuff. We're going to look at the second set of questions that come from this next scene we want to show you, which is a scene based around America Tropical, the mural on Olvera Street, which, for anyone here who doesn't know, is, in a way, like, it would be way too on the nose for most script writers, because in a sense it is the literal whitewashing of a particular historical account of Imperial America. And I think one of the central questions as we put this together was really, we kept coming back to this, which histories we get to remember, which histories are we told we have to forget. And this particular scene, which is in 1932, Mexican painter David Siqueiros was commissioned to create a mural on the roof of the Italian Hall, overlooking Olvera Street. And this scene tells the story of what happened next. Yeah, so I think the mural, in a way is literally an illustration of so many of the themes that we're talking about tonight, in terms of the way in which history becomes contested, and people like Christine Sterling, who was the woman who largely created Olvera Street, are able to impose a cleaner version, if you like, of history. Karla, I wonder, we've talked about this before, how do you approach Christine Sterling, who is this figure who on the one hand created Olvera Street, which has businesses that are still legacy businesses?
This mural. And maybe
So yeah, Christine Sterling, how do you approach her? What is your kind of, having spent some time with us and learning, how do you approach this figure who on the one hand was creating a place that she hoped would help Mexican families in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, didn't speak Spanish, had a very particular version of what her idea of Mexico looked like. She'd never visited. And it was a little romanticized, shall we say. So, what do we make of her? Do we hold her, so many people hold her up as a hero, but also other people really see her as hugely problematic. How do you?
Today I woke up and chose violence because, yes, because I guess one phase is that she did create something beautiful that we are still enjoying until today. And it has given space for not only celebration of the Mexican culture, but also an area of such important political activism that has occurred here in La Placita and in this area, right? It's the hub, right? That we go and make our voices heard. But at the same time, what's up with this? Like as the kids say, I'm shooken, because no offense to any white ladies, but she's a white lady, and for her to come into this area and say, I will fix it, right? I can save this area. It's so white savior because she's out there thinking that she's truly wholeheartedly helping the community. This bunch of Mexicans, they live so poorly and ugly. Look at this dump, and literally, and then she's like, I'm going to beautify it as my version of Mexico, like her version of Mexico, right? With pretty little papel picado, and we're going to have piñatas, and we're going to have this and that, and all this colorful, versions of Mexico, and yet literally she was faced with the violent history of this colonial project towards the native beings of this land, and she treated them as not important, like the hypocrisy of Christine Sterling, right? Of trying to save an area, beautify an area for the culture, and then she's literally turning away and not listening to the voices, like literal screams of the people of this area, and literally whitewashing something that, we gotta give it to David Esquelas back in the day, that he saw a problem and he's like, I'm going to paint it, right? Artist radical. And he did, and then for her to be like, no, that is not the version of Mexico that I had, we are so nice here out here in the United States. We can't see that horrible history. And she literally painted it over and hid it for 70 years. For 70 years. And this is the actions of one woman that literally erased us, and how much we have suffered as a community, and literally erased it for 7 years. Can you believe that? So, today I say that, we don't like Christine Sterling.
Okay, Angélica, I'm gonna pause because I think Christine Sterling. Yeah, she's like the original white savior in many senses of it, and for those who don't know, it wasn't just the Mexicans. She was also very up for helping the Chinese build Chinatown. That's a separate story, which bears on. So she spread her love. But I guess the question which I come to is what. I actually have two separate questions, which I don't think are that related. But the first one is, what would you say to those of us who are, not Latina? What in a time when there's certainly a need for allyship, what are the best ways to not be Christine Sterling? How should those of us who want to support the community in ways that are more thoughtful than Christine do that in meaningful ways?
Well, the first thing that I would just say is, and I was thinking gentrification the whole time that we were talking about that. But really, I would say it's not about support, so I'll use the word. It's not, I don't need your support. I need you to see that actually your humanity is diminished because my humanity is diminished. So that you're not seeing it as, we're not shared, any Christine Sterling and anybody. It's like we have to see each other as the fact that another human being is mistreated diminishes my ability to be a human being. And I think about that when we think about all the people who are living in the streets. And I know that every time that we walk and sometimes have to walk around, our humanity is diminished because they don't have a roof over their head. And all of the systemic issues. And I think that it's about also understanding what are the systems and the laws and that are put in place that allow for this to happen. And so then seeing it's our humanity. It's not about, you know, supporting others. It's about saying, actually, this is wrong. And I'm supporting myself in order for me to live in a world where people aren't mistreated, where I don't have to live. And so it's really important for us to see that. And I think when we think about moving forward in this country, certainly in the city and in the state and globally, it's about understanding that which we gain in terms of our privilege, but also understanding that it is gained by other people's suffering. And so we think about all this, you know, we're so used to so much service, right? Whether it's we go out to eat, well, who's cooking in the back, right? We have our salads and our strawberries and our blueberries and the whole fork that we care about. Well, who's putting that food on the table? Some things that struck me, what you said about the love, right? I always think that right now, for example, again, is about, it's about the caring that we have for each other. So a lot of individuals who are undocumented are actually doing some of the most caring work in this country. So they're caring, they're feeding us, they're putting food at our tables. They're actually caring for our children, caring for the most sacred, which is our homes, our domestic workers. Caring for our elderly in nursing homes, building the structures in which we can do these beautiful things, the construction workers. So it's incredible level of care work, right? Incredible level of care work. And it's loving work. And right now my mom is in a rehab center. She had a horrible medical situation where and you see all of these elderly men and women being taken care of by these Latina men and women, Black, Asian women in this home. And that's how they're living. So to me, it's about recognizing that, which is actually folks are loving me, I need to love back. But my love for them can't just be emotional and I would say even theatrical. It's really about saying, and so what do I have to do so that this world is more just, so the world I live in for is not systematically oppressing a whole group of people and mistreating them. And that's what I feel is real true partnership and real true being part of the human family.
Okay, so Francisco, as you know, we played the scene. It's obviously a recreation. It's based on a whole lot of sources, including the LA Times critics. 1932, his kind of what would you call it, like review, I guess, of the mural opening night. But I wonder if you could kind of fill us in a little bit on the kind of historical background, and particularly the work to bring that story to light, and how you think maybe that reflects changing approaches to telling this kind of history. You talked about the hope that perhaps there are ways in which history is being restored and being told in different ways. How does that process of that mural coming to light reflect that, or not?
Well, I'd like to be on record that probably one of the stupidest things that Christine Sterling did, and she was a madrina, she liked that term to call herself, on Olvera Street. Keep in mind that it's the LA Times and Harry Chandler, who's the owner of the LA Times at this particular historical moment, that pushed the development of Olvera Street and kind of gave her a free hand to do this. And I wondered, with their fantasy Disneyland portrayal of Mexico, very romantic, very kind of like fantasy of agricultural Mexico, rural Mexico. They wanted something to fit with that. To be blunt with you, I don't see how in the hell anybody would contract cicadas. It shows just total ignorance of not only Mexico, but the Mexican population here. To put it bluntly, Cicados was even in trouble with the Mexican government. He was in jail. He was under house arrest in Cuernavaca before he came here. And so Cicados is one of these famous Mexican muralists. And the Mexico of the 1930s is the Mexico of the Revolution. And whatever the factions are, whether it be a Villista, whether it be a Zapatista, whatever the different factions that I know many of you know about, at that moment in the 1930s, it really wasn't divisions anymore. It's rather that you are revolutionaries. So Cicados comes, and he's really relating to what the population, the immigrant population of that time. It's Mexican nationalism. They believe in workers' rights. They believe in social justice. They're anti-American. They're anti-capitalist. And so that's the person that they have that's being told to do an American thing. Okay? And there's different versions of what the mural says, but I think those soldiers are shooting that eagle. They're shooting it. And keep this in mind. What happens to Cicados after, they get mad at him and they don't like it and they whitewash it? He's deported, like everybody else, okay? I mean, because he's another Mexican, which really kind of expresses, what is the American mind at that time? The 1930 census does not make a distinction between Mexican nationals and Americans that are of Mexican descent. That says the whole thing. Now that I have that off my back, okay, good therapy for me. Now your question is,
No, I think
maybe I can talk to
you're
Richard. But see, there are these competing visions, and I'd like to say that on the structure of this fantasy Disneyland of Mexico, the people who run the puestos, they take control of it. And over time they do things. The Methodist Church in the 20s and the 30s, way back then, are doing social justice. They're feeding people, they're helping people. The Catholic Church, I'm a Catholic, Roman Catholic. I must confess, not so much. But keep this in mind. Later on, that legacy works. And during the 1980s, Father Luis Olivares and the Sanctuary Movement opens up that church. Well, thank you, okay? I appreciate that. I mean, that was a beautiful chapter of respecting sanctuary.
For the Cardinal flew him out of Los Angeles.
Right. But he stayed until his death. Yeah, but good point.
Okay. We're going to, actually this is a very ideal moment to segue into the final scene that we're going to look at for this evening, because it picks up on some of those volunteers and others who were in the train stations. This next scene is set in the train stations. It's listening to the Reconados say their goodbyes. And we wanted to include this in tonight because I think one thing which I think is really important to understand is just how these repatriations or returns took place. It's one thing to announce a mass return, or as we talked about, actually not that many of the deportations at this point were carried out directly by the government. But how do people actually leave? What does that feel like? And I think also, what might that foreshadow, given the announcements that we've all read and heard in the news about plans for huge deportations in the coming months. One thing which doesn't come out of this scene, but which I think I was struck by when we were doing the research, was just how many of the oral histories talking about these moments of departure made a connection between these coerced returns of Mexican Americans in the 1930s and then the internment of Japanese Americans that happened in the 1940s, and saw particularly in the logistics of how departure was managed a direct connection. So yeah, we'll play the train clip, and then we'll talk a little bit about the moment of departure. Yeah, so I should say, we say this in the tour, that the repatriations did not actually happen from Union Station, that we use that as a setting to evoke the atmosphere of what it would have been like. The actual train station where the departures happened from was a mile to the north and is no longer in existence. But that caveat, that note, that historical note aside, Francisco, I wonder if we could come back to an idea that you talked a little bit about at the beginning, which is this question of voluntariness. We hear about how people left, that many people were not being literally loaded onto a train, but were, voluntarily choosing to go. So, what should we call this? Because the words do matter, and we talked about how repatriation is problematic because repatriation implies a return, and it implies some sense of belonging to where you're going. Is it a coerced return? What do you think are the right words that we should be using in order to really express what happened in the 1930s?
Well, as background, here in Los Angeles was really the model of how to do this. As I said earlier, and it's mentioned in the clip that we just saw, in LA County organized trains. And people from other cities, Chicago, Detroit, other places, came here to see how LA did it. So this is kind of the model. And when they began the program, they called it deportation. But the legal counsel for the County of Los Angeles said, you can't call it deportation because only the federal government can deport people. So they fell into this word repatriation, which is supposed to have, legally, the definition of it is supposed to be voluntary. But it raises questions about how voluntary are things. In the sense that you have this huge public raid that receives a lot of publicity, and this then creates fear and anxiety among many, many people. And people that then accept the social workers that are knocking on the door from LA County that's saying, you'd be better off in Mexico with your own people. Well, your own people are here, right? Okay, there you can speak your own language. Well, you can speak it here. You can speak Spanish here. And they'll say things like, oh, you can eat their food that you have over there. Well, you can eat Mexican food here too, right? But that's the way it's presented to them. Also, there were some real headhunters, and they would come out and tell people, well, maybe you got work for only a day a week, but you're liable to lose that because everybody's going to go. And there were laws passed that prohibit the employment of aliens. And in that context, everybody assumes that a Mexican is an alien. Nobody distinguishes in terms of citizenship. So all that pressure leads to not being very voluntary. Now, what do we call it? You could call it unconstitutional deportation because they are deporting U.S. citizens, right? You could call it that. Because you can't, deport a U.S. citizen according to American law. Okay, and Mexican nationals, many of them at that historical period could come and did meet the requirements of the time. They were not, quote, illegal, although that whole concept and that whole term is, obviously wrong. So I think it's a forced expulsion, if you talk about the whole group, but I think unconstitutional deportation. A decade of betrayal is called repatriation in the 1930s, and the reason for that, it goes back originally to the 90s. Another version came out later. We talk about the struggle for justice. But if we had called it something else back in those days, I don't know where the library would have put it, in the sense of the title, the definition of it. But as my fellow panelists have made the point right here, It's the same thing. And I think that the true crime here is that this goes back 100 years. But I think what's important here is that attitude of othering the Mexican, that whole attitude. And a lot of the reasons that were given are the same today. Oh, welfare costs. They called it charities at that time. If we could get rid of them, our costs will go down. And you know how talking about cost of government today, right? Right? So it's the same old arguments. Another one, jobs for Americans. Even though we have a whole generation, many people that were here since 1900, 20, 30 years being in this country, contributing to the social economic development. Much like it occurs later when we talk about the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, through that century and into our century.
Thank you. Yeah, that sums up a lot of my feelings about that too. And Karla, I want to sort of take that and move on to another very topical question, which is birthright citizenship. Because I think one aspect of the Mexican repatriations that often isn't always the first thing that gets highlighted is how many of those who were forced to leave were American-born children, so U.S. citizens, who held citizenship by virtue of having been born here. And obviously, yet at the same time, their citizenship was seen as somehow a technicality and not something that prevented them being told they had to leave. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own experience of, that difficult, you kind of talked a little bit about it already, this question of becoming American at the same time as having a very complicated relationship with what that actually means, as well as this question of birthright citizenship and the idea of once you are here, that you are in fact a U.S. citizen.
Yes, thank you. So as I said before, I was undocumented fully for a very long time, and then I became a DACA recipient, and then I got my legal permanent residency, and I just became a citizen. Yeah, so it's been a whole journey, and although I am glad, and it's a relief to be a citizen of this country. At what cost? Right? At what cost? The trauma of being undocumented and seeing my own family go through the system. It will never go away, regardless if I have papers or not. Quite frankly. And when I became a citizen, when we became a legal permanent resident, I had a whole identity crisis. Because I was like, I lost my community, I'm no longer documented, I've lost help, right? And I'm just like, I can't advocate anymore because that makes me a citizen, am I taking, I had a whole, identity crisis that I had to, I'm still in therapy. But the point is that the trauma of going through I became an activist when I was 18. I'm 17 years old, and it's not like I woke up one day. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna be an activist, y'all. No, I was forced. I didn't even know that I was becoming an activist. I just wanted to go to school, but that's all I wanted, and not be broke, at first. And then out of a sudden, I realized that I had so many disadvantages, and there was just so much injustice. So my advocacy became as justice, right? And a little bit of copying on what Angélica said earlier is that I saw that many people fighting for immigrant rights that were not immigrants themselves, they talked for us rather than with us, right? And that just didn't sit right with me because I'm like, I can speak, and I can share my story. So, and with that, activism became a lot of realization, a lot of history, a lot of parallels of the past to the present, and not only the distant past, like 1931, but also what's been happening for so many years, right? with the Clinton era, the Bush era, the Obama era, now we're going through it right now, right? So that in itself, when I became a legal permanent resident and then a citizen, that didn't erase any of that history in my mind. That did not erase any of that trauma in my mind. So where do I go from here? Like, I have no idea. So I don't know, but like, I can answer that question. It's hard for Karla because, like, it's hard for me because I am traumatized. Like, quite frankly, I mean, I look normal, but no, I'm not. Like, I am, like, my mental health is sometimes great and sometimes it's not, because I'll be honest, especially during the holidays and everybody's with their family and then I have no one. Right? And even if I'm able to go see my parents, I can't go every year. Your girl's poor. So, you know, it's so painful. And seeing, my brother becoming Mexican in Mexico. You know, like, he's Mexican in Mexico, and he always says I'm more Mexican now because I'm a Mexican in Mexico, and you're a Mexican in the United States, and then you have to come back and be a Mexican. You know, it's a whole identity crisis. So it's not easy, and I think that the resentment that has birthed within me towards this country and the injustice, the pure injustice that never ends. This same story that I'm telling you is happening for 100 years. And it's not stopping, it's actually gonna get worse. And that resentment that lives within me, it is huge. But I don't wanna end it there though, because although there's a lot of resentment, there's also incredible love. Because my quest for my own human rights have really exposed me to amazing people, Angélica, Francisco, Katy, Gabby, and all my friends that have been in this fight with me, trying to obtain our human rights, people that I've met over the years that have helped me uplift not only my family stories, but also the stories of my community. And besides the stories, like the fight for legislation, and although that has been successful and sometimes has been very unsuccessful, it is the community that is bonded. You know, my best friends are gonna be the people that I've met through my activism, because they really know like what it feels like to be so dehumanized that people sometimes only see what can we bring to the table, right? Like, don't deport them, like, you know, they contribute $1 trillion to the IRS, like for real. And I just think that I lost the plot a little bit, but my point is that I think that when it comes to immigration, there needs to be a very important conversation of what it means to love our communities and how to address that resentment when there is a change of status, because it never goes away. That trauma never goes away. If I ever have children, they're gonna know and they're gonna live with that trauma because I'm putting that trauma on them, and they're probably gonna put that trauma on their children, because this is something that is truly painful. And it's empowering as well, because you find your power. I found my power, but it's so painful. It's extremely painful, and I just really hope that after today's conversation, we take from here that we really need to stand up for our communities by all means necessary. Protesting on the sidewalk is not enough anymore. We're living in very, very dark times, and our communities are targeted. And I feel like I just need to say that right here, that protests on the streets are not enough anymore, and there needs to be a more preventative measures to defend our communities, because it's going to get uglier. And although I respect the work of all the people from the past and the present, like these college students that were dancing in the 1930s, and we do it as well in the present, that is no longer enough. I think it has to end with us.
I think that's the perfect place into what is my last question before I hope there'll be a little time for people in the audience to ask their questions, which is, what is CHIRLA doing right now to prepare for what's coming?
First of all, I just really want to say how much I've enjoyed being on this panel. I feel like I've had really wonderful professors. You're my new favorite professor. And then just to say how wonderful and what an honor it is to sit here with you. So anyway, it's just been really wonderful. So one of the things that I really want to say is we really have to always understand that with us, given everything there is so much darkness, in us is light, and there is a lot of beautiful, the things that allow us to survive, and that is the love of our families, the love of our community, our traditions, our music, our ability to be with each other. And I really want us to understand how powerful that is. And so when we see this horrible darkness and these horrible laws and actions that are taken, that we don't feel guilty when we're sitting down with family and having our tamales and laughing and listening to our rancheras and our music and all the beautiful things, because they allow us. Those are the things that have been created by the people before us in order for us, who dreamed great things for us, and who, because of them, we're here. We have a better life and a better chance because they fought for us. I just really want us to, as much as we talk about that, I also want us to, when you said, what is CHIRLA doing? It's just reminding us of the power that we have as a people and the value that we have as our people. Even as I'm going to all the action steps, I really feel like that's so fundamental. Because what this country wants to do is to diminish who we are and diminish our culture and our traditions, the people, not to see the value of our beautiful skin and our language. And so just that in and of itself is really powerful. And don't think and don't feel guilty if you're doing anything beautiful for yourself and your family, okay? Because it's gonna get us through that. Okay, but now to the action steps. What is CHIRLA doing? Number one, CHIRLA runs the LA Raise Rapid Response Network. So really making sure we're bringing together, and you can be part of that volunteer base, but it's bringing together people who are trained, constitutional monitoring, etc., in order to respond to raids. Unfortunately, as CHIRLA, we have had to respond to countless mass immigration enforcement actions. This isn't from now. You said it. We started our LA Raids Rapid Response in 2006, and the only hiatus we have was this last administration, but this is something that is important. So responding to immigration enforcement, number one, to verify that it's true, because we don't want to spread panic. Not everything is what shows on social media, so I just really want you to understand that some of that is not real, but then verify that which is, and respond to it. And what does that mean to respond? Is to respond to the families whose family members have been picked up, because it is incredibly traumatic, but it also means that we have the clock is ticking in order to provide legal defense in order for their families to stay. So the other thing we're doing is our whole prepárate para quedarte, prepare to stay, fight to stay. This is your home, and so family plans that we've developed over many years, which is allow you to really have a conversation, if you are undocumented, about how we're going to do it, what's going to happen, who we're going to call, and just really engaging in the knowledge of rights. And know your rights is not just for immigrants, it's for every single U.S. citizen in this country. Everybody needs to know their constitutional rights right now. And so it's about, having the right not to have people go into your home without a warrant. Making sure that you know that you don't have to answer any questions to anybody just because they ask you, just because of the color of your skin. And it's working, guys. It's working. The Know Your Rights work is working. We've trained, yesterday, our director of community education and outreach, who's in charge of a lot of our Know Your Rights, over 41,000 people have actually already been trained since November. And we're not the only ones doing it. So think about all the organizations across the country. Everybody knows about the red card. Everybody. This is power. And to the point that you have somebody like Tom Holman going up in national news and saying, all those immigrants, they know they're right. You're like, they are so well educated. Well, yeah, and every single American should know their rights right now. So that's what we got to do. So if you, spread that information, know it yourself, because we've also had U.S. citizens that are being questioned, people with green cards that are being stopped, so make sure you know that. That is really important. The other thing is all of this was done by politicians, guys, and I feel like it's really important. There's a bunch of Democrats that just got elected here in California who are voting the wrong way. So here in LA County, all of us, we have to call George Whitesides right there, who just got elected 7,000, I think it's 7,880 votes that got him to be elected. We wanted a different reality from that vote, from those votes, and if they're voting alongside the Republicans, what's the point? And so I want every single one of you to be calling, if you live in LA County, you call George Whitesides and you say absolutely unacceptable. Number two, if you live in Orange County, you know, it's David Min, it's Derek Tran. If up north, it's Adam Gray, it's any Democrat that's voting with these Republicans to create harm for our communities should absolutely hear from you. Because at the end of the day, all of these decisions were made by men and women, and so we have to hold those men and women accountable and stop them from doing this work, you know, this horrible, horrible actions, and for them to actually represent us. So each one of us, even if we're not constituents, it is so critical that they hear from us. And here, our mayor, I just saw Solomon, he might have left, but our mayor needs to hear that, you know, we stand proud around our sanctuary city. Our governor needs to hear that we have his back around the California Values Act, county by county. Because when I started here in the mid-90s, a lot of you I see in the room who were fighting that fight, this state was the most anti-immigrant state. We here, a lot of us, all of us, we changed that for people. It's not perfect, but across the country, we're the most pro-immigrant state. So let's defend that which we've actually won. And so, you know, and build from there. So it's important for us to really stand up for our work. There's a horrible bill, HR 32, which we're calling Defund Our Communities Act. They call it something else, but it's HR 32 in the House, which would actually punish us for being in sanctuary cities and would prevent us to use our own tax dollars to pay for in-state tuition, the California DREAM Act, to have driver's license for folks who are undocumented, and anything good that we have actually created. We've got to stop that bill, and that's why it's important for us to engage with these elected officials in order to make sure that all of California stands with us and that we stand strong against what this federal government is doing. We're suing, so we're in court. We're suing and making sure that that is it moves forward. And also, this time around, the Trump administration, what they did, they're not just going after our people, they're also going after the organizations that support the immigrants. So they're defunding us. They're sending us a letter that said, you know, our grant, for example, from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is to educate green card holders so they can become citizens of the United States, so they can learn the civics, the English, and the civics classes, the 100 questions to pass for citizenship. They froze across the country every single one of those grants. And so for me, what they're doing is they're trying to take away our power to defend our people. So the other thing you can do is donate to immigrant rights organizations, donate to civil rights organizations, donate to organizations in order for them not to have to shut their doors. Our refugee organizations, right now, they're completely defunded. They sealed off the border, no refugees are coming in, and so the refugee organizations also got stop work orders. So now all our refugee resettlement organizations are laying off their people. This is happening right now. So it's important that we understand that in helping to help our folks, we help our folks, we help our families, we help every institution that's actually supporting. Because what they found out the last time was, oh, how did we get through Trump 1.0? Oh, it's because a lot of folks, a lot of the organizations and the institutions, the churches, were right behind, standing right with them. So these are the things that we do. That's why I always say this is a homework. We come to learn, but we should come also to be ready to take action. And in the room, I see a whole bunch of folks who already are doing this. So let's just keep doing what we know is going to defend our families, just the way our ancestors did before us.
thank you. This has also been like the easiest panel ever to moderate because you're all been incredibly eloquent and responded in great depth and with a lot of emotional content as well, which I thank you for sharing your stories. We are an organization that, at the core of what we do is the idea that telling stories matters, and that's our superpower. That's how we connect. That's how we build empathy beyond rooms of people who are already on the side of immigrants and build it outwards, and that's the work that we're doing. And I think there could be no greater proof of why storytelling can be so effective than listening to Karla, Angélica, and Francisco tell their stories. We do have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you for all of you who've stayed through to 8:30. Appreciate if some of you have to go, but we'd also love to hear from those of you in the audience who do want to say something. Yes.
I was just going to say power to the young people of every generation, because the way that I think about it, no movement has ever succeeded without the tenacity, the guts of young people. But I also say also of the generation that, so this multi and intergenerational leadership, I think, is powerful. For me, it's important, and I think you were getting to this. We have to be more disruptive economically. So I believe in the power of economic withholding labor and withholding your money. I tell everybody this is a good time to save your money, put it in the bank. Maybe we don't need to shop in places that don't like us, And I'm sorry, you can't have your Cinco de Mayo and then try to mistreat your Cinco de Mayo, your Taco Tuesdays and all this other stuff, and then mistreat us in this way. So I really think it's important for us to really understand that we have power in our vote, in our economy, in the streets. And I also think that there's civil disobedience that needs to happen. Right now, there's this whole piece around undocumented people registering to the government. We don't have to comply. So the other thing is no compliance to some of this. I feel like there's too much happening right now across the board. I'm certainly not talking about the immigrant community, because we're out there protesting, where our kids are protesting, we're standing up. But I think that there's too much compliance, acceptance. And I also want to say shame on a lot of our legacy Latino organizations and ethnic organizations, ethnic banks. You can go on and on if they're not standing up too, because a lot of people are now afraid, and I get it, and I keep saying I get it, self-preservation. But you know what? This is a time not to just comply and be docile. So it's important for me, for all of us to say, we really got to push some of our largest legacy organizations to be bolder and stronger. They're sitting in some of these spaces where they can make a difference. And to me, it's this is what I really wanted to say, and I almost forgot to say, is there's a lot of people who think that Latinos agree with the idea that you deport massively immigrants. And so some folks out in Washington, D.C. are saying that the reason Latinos want this done too. Please be part of just fighting back against that narrative, that lie. And if some people agree, whether it's agree with that, it is a very minute group of people in comparison to all the people, use the word abhorrent, all the Latino community who understand that this is about discrimination and racism and who see it as abhorrent. So I think it's important for us also to really stop that out in its tracks, because when people use our own people to say that's why they're doing stuff, if there's something wrong, and we gotta stop it.
Thank you, Angélica. So I think for me, in my perspective, I come from the Dreamer movements of 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11 with the DACA movements, 2012. So I would say that we were pretty radical. Those early Dreamer movements, we were out there. We literally did not have any protection. And I was out there on national television, be like, hi y'all, I'm undocumented, no, we were doing hunger strikes. We did hunger strikes in front of Obama's office. We went to Washington, D.C. We did civil disobedience here in LA. We were out there. I do have to say that the new generation, like the smaller children, like young people, like the young people, probably are lacking some of that tenacity, some of that like we're gonna go and F things up. But I don't think it's because of lack of inspiration or anything like that. Not absolutely. It's fear. One, because they don't know what to do and everything, it seems like it's getting worse all the time. But second, I do have to say that veteran organizers, especially grassroots organizers that don't belong to any organizations that started that movement, we failed. Honestly, we failed to educate on how to organize the younger generations. That is a hole that we left because we were tired. We didn't know like how to educate the younger ones. Somewhere like did that work. A lot of us did not do that work. So I think that there needs to be a better, maybe a bunch of like oldies organizers. Like we should all get together peacefully and just ignore any disagreements that we may have amongst each others and invest in educating and training these young organizers, because there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of mobility right now from the kids. So we need to grab that and inspire them to keep going. And also another one is just that, let's be real, this is a long battle that we are going to be fighting. A long battle to be fighting. So we need to be able to tell the kids, let's go F shit up. Let's go do this and that, but also don't forget to eat, breathe, drink, and have fun and relax, because this is a long run. This is the work in social justice work is full-time job. It's not something that you just can do twice a day and you're like, fine, okay, like I did my work for the year. No, this is an ongoing. So I hope I answered your question, but I understand where you would say that there is a lack of radicalism in the streets right now, and what happened in a few days ago here in February was absolutely beautiful to see. But I do think that we as organizers, and there's many organizers here, we need to be more mindful on how to educate the younger ones and inspire them to that radicalism, because I'll be honest, there's a lot of organizers here that are from organizations, and I think we need to also separate from that a little bit, because with that comes funding problems and all that. So join your mutual aid groups, join your grassroots groups that are not organizations, so you can be also outside of that, not completely separate, but outside of that to actually fight back, because we can wear many hats, right? We can wear many hats. And also stay away from bipartisanism. Bipartisanism, you know what I mean, because a lot of people fear that if we are not radical enough.
I love what you're saying. I am getting like the
Sorry, so you even made me drop my yeah, but just to like wrap it up, I think we just need to be very mindful on how do we educate the younger generation, and just separate our Democrat heart, because we think the Democrats are good, and also from not completely stay within the lanes of the nonprofit industrial complex as well. So that's my 2 cents. Okay.
We're all going to be here for a few minutes, so if anyone has a burning question for one of the panelists, please come and find us. Thank you so much for being a fantastically attentive audience. It's our first event as the California Migration Museum in LA, but hopefully it won't be the last. It's been, really, both are very sobering, but I think also a little inspiring as an evening, and that's a kind of great place to end the night, I think. So thank you, everybody, and especially to all the members.
Se puede. Sí, se puede. Se puede. Sí, se puede. Se puede. Sí, se puede.
Vamos chingados, no.
Gracias, Betty.
Thank you. I really